Wait for it. Wait for it, and we're live. Hey, all you crazy sci-fi and fantasy fans. It's time for your daily dose of shenanigans over here at the Blasters and Blades podcast. Just a couple of nerdy veterans and one chaos coordinator geeking out over our science fiction passions and fantastical fantasies. A place where magic is king, the sky is the limit, and space is the place. We are the podcast that puts the fun in dysfunction. So without further ado, we're going to let our guests introduce themselves to our listeners and viewers at home. We got first Mr. Bill Fawcett.
Greetings, everyone. I'm author, editor, been around working with the 1632 series since it started, and the only one here who hasn't written a book on it.
But you're a fellow history nerd, and that counts for everything.
Oh, probably booked my 1,000 hours of history arguments with Eric and agreements out of the series, without question. Significant portion of WindyCons were spent that way.
It's a good way to spend time.
Oh, it was.
All right, next we have Mr. Charles Gannon.
Hi, I'm Chuck Gannon. I write in most genres. I haven't done a reverse harem fuzzy yet, but the year is early. I had the privilege of working with Eric on, I think it's 6 books. I think 1, 2, 3, 6. I think, yeah.
All right, and you could always sort of pigeonhole that reverse harem fuzzy story into the 1632 universe. I'm sure Tony.
Well, that's what I was planning, but now you spoiled the surprise.
Oh, dang it!
I mean, my God, you gave it away.
You should,
and I figured you were still wanting to actually be in the furry costume for the cover, but I don't know about that, JR. You'll have to work that out now.
Well, I'll just bribe Tony. I'm sure it'll work out fine.
I'm pretty sure the editor on that's not going to allow it. He's pretty tough and very unreasonable, right?
Any truth to the rumor that just a little bit of chocolate and coffee will get you in there with Tony?
No. A lot of chocolate, a little coffee.
A lot of chocolate.
All right. Next, we have the bald and beautiful Mr. Griffin Barber.
Yeah, I'm Griffin Barber. I've written 2 novels so far. I'm working on the 3rd one in the Mughal cycle of the 1632 universe. Looking forward to seeing more stuff come out and working on more stuff as well. I'm also an editor at Bain Books and the producer on the Bain Free Radio Hour, doing what you're doing, as well as all the after action stuff to put together a podcast.
I've done some tours of historic buildings of policing from the era, and I could tell you could almost introduce horror elements into that universe by just writing historic cop stuff.
Yep. In
1630s.
Yeah, it's a little early for what we really call cops, except for the in China and perhaps in India as well. But it was very different back then.
Yeah, of course, Colonial Williamsburg isn't quite that far back in history, but they've got the examples of prisons throughout the eras and some of the tools of correction, as they called them,
yep.
Which is euphemism for torture because nobody ever expects the Spanish Inquisition.
No.
All right, next we have the lovely Miss Jodi Lynn Nye.
Hello. I am Jodi Lynn Nye. I write science fiction and fantasy mostly, a little bit of mystery, a little bit of other things, a lot of it with a humorous bent. And there is humor in the book that I wrote for the 1632 universe. I was honored to be asked by Eric to join the throng and had a lot of fun working with him. He was a good friend. And it just shows me that I can't reach out to him and say, hey, what about this? But I hope that I've honored him with what I've produced.
For those not familiar, the little pang in our voice when we talk about working with Eric is we lost Eric a couple of years ago. And this universe continues on because it's such a strong concept that he created, but we do miss our friend.
Very much
so. And we did interview him for the one book that he wrote with Charles that was the Dragon. Did you actually win that year?
Yes.
So I will link to that episode so you guys can check it out as well. I think it was season 2.
I have a funny story about that too when there's time for it.
Oh,
I have a plug for the Dragon Awards.
All right, so tell us the funny story and then we'll get the plug for the Dragon Awards.
So Eric famously thought that the only award that was worth winning was the Benjamin Franklin Award. How many $100 bills he would have in his hand after writing a book. He absolutely did not care about awards. They were silly. They were nonsense, etc. So one of the things so we went in, we won, and he gets on about 3 or 4 days after we're back. He calls me on the phone and he said, "Chuck, we got a problem." And I said, "What?" He said, "There's 2 of us, but there's only 1 award. I'm going to get in touch with Bill Fawcett and see if we can get 2. But then we may have to pay for one." It's like, Eric, I thought you didn't care about awards. So about the mailing, I mean, he went right over it. The thing is, but one of the great joys about that story for me was not only was it Eric at his sometimes contradictory best,
yes.
but or at least highly eclectic best. But it was great to see. I think he'd won 1 award. Like, I don't know if he won a Prometheus or what, but this one was very high profile, of course, and it was like a kid at Christmas. And seeing that gave that to him is just one of my favorite memories.
I think he'd won the Writers of the Future, hadn't he, Jodi?
Yes,
he was the winner in the Writers of the Future, I think, in like the 2nd year. It was very, very early. And
He was young.
He was young. It was the beginning of his career. So,
Which is
Mother
what
of
it's
Demons. Mother of
But
Demons,
that's-
wasn't it?
Yeah. Yeah, and that was, well, no, you get it for a submitted short story.
Right.
Before Mother of Demons came out, it wouldn't have been eligible.
no, Mother of Demons came right after that.
Right,
Yeah.
same year.
Mhm.
But it went from them to the Dragon Award for him to win an award. 20-some years.
But you'll notice that if any of us are telling a story about Eric and quoting him, it's almost impossible not to go into his voice.
What are you talking about, Jodi? I don't understand. What do you mean?
I don't understand.
I disagree entirely.
My favorite curmudgeon.
He was.
Very,
We all
very
loved
grateful
him.
when he came on the podcast. So
Was that your story that had him in line and for Here Be Dragons? We sent an anthology at Dragon Con we did about 15 years ago. And Eric was famous for proselytizing everyone about his political views when he trapped you back then, especially. And didn't you do something to him in a story, or was that you? The one where he was standing in line, haranguing
Which
Pat
you
Henry?
are-
He's haranguing the guy who owns Dragon Con, basically. And in the story, Dragon Con is really a cover for a secret meeting of dragons.
Oh,
And one of
yes,
the,
Eric, and that.
and remember what happened? The dragon behind him turns around and eats him because he can't take it any longer.
Oh no, that, I wouldn't have done that to him. That's not mine.
No, that was, I don't know. It was one of his friends.
I'm pretty sure that dragon would have coughed him up like a grumpy hairball.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Eric,
I don't know what you're.
Eric's better in small doses. And,
Lots of gristle.
and I think the reason Eric really liked it is because the Dragon Awards is really a People's Choice Award. You can go on dragoncon.org, pay nothing, attend nothing, do whatever you want, and nominate books, movies, games, everything you like. And then thousands of people vote on it. It's not a little thing. It's a real, true People's Choice Award.
Right.
And so when Eric got it, he couldn't claim it was a bunch of elitists giving him recognition for being one of them, which made him feel much better about it. And yes, he did call, and yes, we did print him one at our cost, not his, of course. Sometimes we have a real
I hold
problem.
the extra right here. It's a beautiful award. This is called product promotion. Okay, Dragon Award.
Appreciate it. The flame representing, of course, the flame of knowledge, or maybe the campfire, as we all told stories about, that began our whole genre.
Or the annihilatory power of dragons.
Or it just looked really cool, and we picked it off Cave. But anyway,
since we're talking about the Dragon Awards, before we start talking about the universe itself, Bill, you said you had something you want to say, and I know Jodi's got a book that's eligible in this universe.
well, if you can read, if you like 1632 and you like English history, you'll like the Weaver's Code. Chuck does. You do the Western Hemisphere. You do India too, didn't you?
No,
I'm
that's
in India.
Griffin.
You did.
I
Griff
did-
did
I
India.
resolved the
You did the
people.
West. Yeah.
I did the papal.
And Jodi's got an eligible book this year called Weaver's Code that if you go up, you can get it, I think even at a discount sometimes. And it's a good intro to 1632. And if she gets, and the procedure is you just go on the site, dragoncon.org/awards, and just write in your books that you liked in various topics. And one of them is alternate history, which is, of course, what 1632 is. And doesn't have to be Jodi, she'll just like it. But you can pick your favorite books and encourage others to read them that way. And literally thousands and thousands, into the more than just thousands figures, vote every year. So it really is sort of a people's choice. And that's what I think Eric, who was an avowed, put it subtly, card-carrying member of the Communist Party for many years. The most capitalist communist I ever met, but nonetheless, I think that's probably why I like it, because it's our award and it's by fans, for fans, and has really, the convention homes it but doesn't even run it. So.
And for those of you that are interested, I will link the Dragon Award so you can fill out your nomination, and I'll link to Jodi's eligible book, the Weaver's Code,
Yes,
as
please.
well. So if you haven't checked it out, and that's available if you like supporting authors more directly. I understand if they buy it directly from Baen, the authors and everyone gets a little bit more of a cut because Amazon takes less, or Barnes and Noble or wherever else you buy fine books. So I'm trying to make it a point of not just linking to Amazon by default now, because I realized, when they go, sometimes they just ban books randomly. I'm like, well, maybe that's not the best business plan.
Yeah.
All right. So well, first off, let me see if I can pull up the code. So how did the 1632 universe start? Were any of you guys there at the beginning?
Eric has done a number, and I think he was talking with Harry Turtledove at a WindyCon or one of the cons, anyhow. Might be Liberty, might have been Windy. And they were talking about periods that were right to set the various alternate histories in. And Eric pointed out no one had done one of the most changing periods and most time-honored, time-changing, vulnerable periods in history, which was the 100 Years and 30 Years Wars. And the conversation that I believe then is I've heard him recount it. I'm just a secondhand. Well, what would that do? And somehow Eric made this massive jump to moving Grantville, a community from West Virginia, which can't get much more Union or much more American than a small town from West Virginia, into the middle of the heart of the 30 Years War. And that's pretty much where it all started. And then he just wrote it, showed it to Jim Baen at the time, and Jim went, yes, I'm already using your stuff. Yes. And Jim had loved him because he did a series of collaborations with Harry earlier that went really well. Or with Dave Drake, rather, that went really well.
Belisarius series.
The Belisarius series, which if we haven't read, is also brilliant. But then most of Dave's stuff was. And so he did that book, and everybody went, it's exactly what we want, and it's different. And from there, it just kept going. And Griff, how many novels have now been written in 1632 world?
I believe we're at, I believe Jodi's was 29.
No, mine was 37.
37. See, I'm
30. Do not be discouraged. You do not have to read them all. Even I haven't had a chance to read them all.
But if you're into it, you can certainly read them all.
And a magazine.
Yeah, and the magazine. I know there's over like 10 million words in print.
That is not zero. That's a lot of words.
It's a lot of words.
And none of it's redundant, believe me.
Yeah,
they're thick books. They'll give Brandon Sanderson a run for his money when it comes to length.
And there's a lot more spice in them than in Sanderson as well. One of the cool things about the series, for anybody who's a lover of history, is I've actually considered, and I want to do this for Lou at the very least, is making a T-shirt that says everything I know about the 17th century I learned from reading 1632 and the series.
That's a good idea.
And the attention to detail and historical accuracy is amazing.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's the characters, I think, that are involved that we know the names of. And that,
historical figures wander in and out of the series.
Somewhat colorful figures like Richelieu.
Yeah.
Spinoza.
Yeah, lots of fun to be had. Gustavus Adolphus.
So how did it go from his 1632 book to the universe that has so many different authors writing in it and has gotten, what you said, 10 million words? How did that evolve? Was it just such a runaway success? Or was this more like one of those slow grind books that constantly grew in popularity?
So one of the coolest things that Eric relayed to me from Jim Baen, the founder of Baen Books, was don't be concentrating on the series, write a story, get it done. And that was what Eric did with consummate skill. He completed the 1632 book. And then, there was interest in, hey, this is really good. And maybe we sold a lot of books. Let's see about maybe doing and Baen is also one of them, is I consider it most famous for the master and journeyman relationship between a master of science fiction and a journeyman. And having done that with Pornell and Sterling, Dave Drake and Eric Flint, all these.
Started with Anne McCaffrey and a couple of baby writers who thought maybe we'd give a boost to. I actually created that first series, the Shampoo series with Anne McCaffrey, with a couple of up and coming writers that we thought people should notice. Mercedes Lackey, Jodi Nye, Steve Sterling, and
Elizabeth Moon.
Yeah. And so and then what ended up happening was that I think there were two guys that were on relatively the same ground. David was more successful earlier, or had been earlier. And David came into it with, I want to write the naval part of this thing.
Because of course he did.
Yeah, exactly. And so, once you got those two together, it was, and this is the inspirational thing from Eric that everybody should take, is a rising tide raises all boats. He was like, wow, did David take this in a direction, specifically Admiral Simpson? That was a character that he thought was going to remain to be the inside a-hole for the whole series.
David Weber, not David Drake that we mentioned earlier.
Correct. Yes.
Right.
Chuck, how'd you get roped into this?
Me?
You, Chuck.
Chuck.
I know, Griff.
Well, actually, that will be a kind of cascading story, because how I got roped into it ultimately then will lead into how Griffin got roped into it.
Right.
I was just a guest at Lunicon, which no longer exists, in 2009. I want to say. Eric was the master of ceremonies because his friend Dave Freer had been brought in all the way from New Zealand as the guest of honor. So we're on a panel. I've never met him. I know of him somewhat. My life had taken me away from science fiction for a little while, so I wasn't up on everything, to put it lightly. And of course, now that's an absolutely archaic thing a concept to even say. I'm not up on everything. You could, in the turn of the century, at least the 90s. But we were on this panel about writing action scenes. And so he at this time was he was doing Jim Baen's Universe, which was paying an exorbitant per word rate at that time.
I sold the story to them. It was very remunerative.
Yes, it's like, wow, you might still be able to make a living selling shorts. I mean, not really, but it was that much better than what was out there. And so I have a background in film, so I was talking about writing action sequences in a sense the same way you cut film, which you start an establishing shot. You never introduce new objects once the action starts, and you generally tend to the shots get closer and closer and shorter, which actually is sort of it's a synesthetic thing with the heart. You're actually cueing the body to the body's response towards increased anxiety and excitement, and et cetera. And so I finished talking about this, and Eric, who had, I think, not yet begun affecting his bowlers. He was at the other end, the entire other end of the table from me. And he leans over and he said, "Have you sent me anything?" And I said, "No." He said, "Will do." And said, "That's how I met Eric." And so we met in the hall afterward. I had actually published with Bain already in the early '90s in Jerry Purnell's War Worlds, so he said, "Well, I can't invite you to come in because I can't guarantee you that." And he told me all the things that were unlikely to happen, but all those things happened, and because he was very careful not to give you false hopes, and I was in at that point. As a matter of fact, the first thing that I wrote never wound up getting used the way it was intended to be as a short. It actually got inserted into my second 1632 novel as one of the major arcs, the Irish Wild Geese Mercenaries. Then, so I had a pretty easy entree, and he gave me immense freedom. Eric will tell you, he's famous for saying he works with writers in one of three ways. And I think Jodi and I are very much the same kind, which is you go, you do, I might add some things, I might change some things, but you're flying on your own. Then he did this sort of very intense interaction with, like, for David Weber, where they were trading pieces of the manuscript back and forth a lot. And then there are people that he sort of, I guess you could say, he was mentoring them through the process, right? And he was just wonderful to work with. I mean, he just gave me extraordinary freedom, and I could sit here saying forever how many ways I'm indebted to Eric, but we'd be here for all the time.
So say we all.
So before we circle back to the concept of the universe, since you wrote with Eric directly for that last book that you wrote with him, do you have a favorite character that you and Eric created together?
Well, we didn't create characters together. He had created characters that I then took on. And I'll speak with one of those, who is probably one of my favorite ones to write. And I like it because one of the things in the books is they keep on trying to find Eric's voice in mine, which is actually that's truly not that is not a useful thing to do. Right. But the character of Eddie Cantrell, who starts out as a young, very idealistic war gamer in Grantville, who ultimately, because of the kind of mind he has, and he's smart, and he's that sort of individual, he is not some imposing figure, but he gets the job done. He's determined, he's creative, and he has a sort of indefatigable spirit. And he's a lot of fun to write because he's married to this absolutely firecracker of a Danish, not princess, because she's a product of a morganatic marriage, but his learning about women in general, because of his background as a high school student, who's not particularly, I guess, successful.
He was a nerd.
All of a sudden, it's like this is his experience, and it was a lot of fun. And that novel particularly, I knew that women were going to play a large part in it, but that became in many ways a novel about how the arrival of the uptimers has completely empowered it. It's not like they're giving the power to women. It's like they have books written by women, and they realize more of their own women have been writing books that they didn't know about, and all of a sudden they find their voice, and in finding their voice, they sometimes pick up pistols and swords too. And that book just wrote itself out that way for me.
So I would imagine as the universe grows that there at some point someone's keeping the universe Bible to keep everyone on track, because eventually you run out of room to add new characters from that town, because you would think you've met them all already after a certain point.
Yeah, that was one of his incredibly smart moves, was from the beginning setting up he and
Virginia,
thank you.
Yes, Virginia DeMars.
Virginia DeMars, they got together, and she's a genealogist and has quite a bit of education in that field. And they basically modeled a West Virginia town where Eric had experience of all these coal miners and blue collar workers. They modeled that, used that, and modeled it in a genealogy record, basically, that Virginia would have recognized for any small town in America. and populated it with people of the varied religions, ethnicities, veterancy experience with the military, all that thing. It was all done for that size of town. So right from the get-go, there weren't any Navy SEALs running around going to mess everybody up and do that stuff. Marine recon, no. There were some very not tip of the spear veterans. There were quite a few of those based on the fact that they were either Vietnam veterans or Korean War veterans. Because again, this is in the year 2000, West Virginia mining town. So there's some fascinating stuff there that went into the world building, especially when he opened up the world. Because after working with David Weber, he started working with other folks as well. He did the 2 with David Weber, and I think David couldn't do the next one. And he was looking around for other folks to do things with anyway. And it just
was incredibly inclusive.
Yeah. And talking about, talking the talk and walking the walk. He wanted to make sure that he included other people, other points of view, because for one, it was good for him. It's good for his bottom line, but also it was just really good to share that experience, that wealth of experience that he had experienced working with Dave Drake and that kind of thing. So he really paid it forward in so many ways. And
I'm sorry, go ahead.
At the time of his passing, there were at least 124 other authors who had their first publication from something that Eric did with him, including me. My first fiction publication in that case was through that. So yeah, I mean, there is no one, flat out no one has done more, especially as merely an author, for the rest of the science fiction author community. So many names.
I think some of the authenticity of the universe comes from the multiplicity of voices.
Yep.
A lot of editors and a lot of publishers will say, do you really want to bring other people into your room because it dilutes, it. And my attitude is, and Eric and I were, I think, very much of a like mind on this. I think probably all of us here are. Actually, when you can always sense the same sort of worldview, when you can always sense the same, no matter how much a person can vary their style, there's something that different authors bring that lets you know it's really a different voice now. And that makes a world feel like it's populated with different people. I think it's a great model. I think it's a lot of work, but I think it's worth the work.
But to answer your question, for the most part, we have the very first tier of stuff right now with 1632 and Beyond, the magazine that rose from the ashes of the Grantville Gazette, is Bjorn Hassler. And Bjorn was the assistant editor under the old magazine, and now has stepped up and is the editor at 1632 and Beyond, doing an amazing job. He also has like an encyclopedic knowledge, not only of who, but of what, where, and why that all of us have relied on at one point or another. And he's a practitioner of yes and. He doesn't tell you no. He says, yeah, we can do that, but we'd have to get this done too. Like these are the things that we'll have to get through to get that. He never says no outright. He tries to say yes at every turn.
Although he did have to go out and post at one time, there were no Navy SEALs in Grantville when it came over, particularly when the Gazette was getting a Navy SEAL a month story.
Right.
So
Bjorn is a treasure. When I was working on my book, I sent things to him and I said, is this possible? Because there's a limited number of people in Grantville, it's a kind of a lending library. You have to ask, is a person of this description possible? Where are they at this time? Can I borrow them? Is it likely that they will be in that kind of place? Oh, well, that person isn't. Or he told me, yes, you can borrow this one character. And then he had to call me back and say, on second thought, this one isn't, but there are 4 characters that you could choose from, and here they are. Here are their names. Here's their description. Here's where they first appeared in the series, and it's all at his fingertips. He is an absolute treasure.
Yeah, the first one had already been given to somebody else, as I remember.
Right.
So the basic premise, if I'm understanding it correctly, for everyone who doesn't know about the 1632 universe, is basically this West Virginia coal town in circa 2000 gets sent into the past in 1632. Now, is it directly into the past, or is it an alternate dimension version of the past?
They don't know.
Yeah, they don't know. But later on in later editions, it was stated that it's kind of it has become an alternate version now of
because of the changes,
because of all the changes and the ripples that have gone out.
And of course, the problem of if they went back and changed it, they wouldn't exist to go back when they did, which means that they wouldn't have gone back and changed it, so they would have existed.
The Lincoln paradox.
Yeah.
And
when it's a real case of it's not just the people. One of the things that I liked most about Eric's pitch to me, or not really even pitch, but just describing what was going on, and what I like to tell people is that so many alternate histories seem to be, well, a steam engine goes back, or an AK-47 goes back, or this or that or the other thing, and then that's monkey copied and blah, 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 blah. But the most destabilizing thing that went back is the library of the high school. That is the truly destabilizing thing. And it doesn't even matter if no human beings had come back with it. Somebody goes in there and says, Galileo's right.
Yeah.
Things take off in a really different direction from that.
Just the map from a geography class.
Yeah. Look, all the places where they say there are deposits, son of a gun, they're there. It's just, once it goes back, there is no turning back. So I guess they like to, in multiverse sort of things, they talk about branching events. I think what you're looking at is this arriving, it creates a branching event that spawns, if you will, an alternate history. Wow, what a concept.
So how were they received, the people that went back with this town? How were they received when they appeared in 1632? Did they appear directly in West Virginia? So it would be inhabited by the
Germany.
They're in Germany before it was really anything more than a collection of states. So Thuringia is the region of Germany that they enter into. Basically, the Ring of Fire event cuts. I think it's a 5 mile or 1.5 mile radius.
I think it's 6 mile diameter.
6 mile diameter circle.
So actually, really big.
Picking it up out of West Virginia and plopping it down in 1631, late 1631, Germany. And their first encounters are with Spanish mercenaries who are raping and pillaging their way across the region. And they deal with those guys like we would deal with guys going crazy and raping and pillaging across our land, right? So they deal with those guys. So the vested interests have two choices. They can either go against the flow, or they can kind of go with this. And there's some religious set questions that are asked about, is this predestination? There's all sorts of questions that are being asked in the time already, and changes that are being made to the economy, to just about every facet of life, that make it a really cool moment to add this mix.
And one of the big things that affects everything is not the inventions, it's the ideas.
Yeah.
Introducing a full-blown concept of democracy in 1631, 1632, when Europe is a burning mess.
So one of the things I've interviewed Taylor Anderson, who wrote the Destroyer Man series, similar concept, modern people going, although his wasn't really back in time. But one of the things that came up in that discussion was the idea that the average sailor in the World War II era would have certain skill sets that allow them to affect machinery to make the repairs. Do you feel like the average citizen in a small West Virginia town has that kind of skill set that, when stuff breaks, they can actually make it work again?
Well,
some do, some don't.
Yeah, and this is one of the things that currently we're trying to get a TV series made, right?
Okay.
And in talking to these folks, one of the things that I have tried to convey to them is that don't set it now, because in 2000 you had a lot more World War II veterans, you had a lot more survivors of the Great Depression. You had people who had skills like canning that we do not have as much of anymore. There are people that do artisanal, but it's not going to be the whole community, especially not every grandma is going to know it. And so there's a lot of that skillage was one of those things that Eric, he struck at exactly the right moment, I think. And, the computers were not omnipresent in cars. The chips weren't necessary to run your car. Now they are. All of those kind of things. And because it is not an overly affluent community, it has even less of those things.
Yep. And it preserved. I'm sorry, go ahead.
And because they're hillbillies, they know how to work on their own stuff, right? They're also coal miners, which means they're used to a hard day's work and operating heavy machinery and being uncomfortable at work and all of those things. So there was genius at play at almost every single level of his book, of his, of this universe. It's just amazing.
People understand that food doesn't come from grocery stores. Food comes from hard work in the field, how to make things, how to preserve things, which gives them a greater understanding of the people that they are now meeting. And introducing the concept of hygiene and bringing in things like vaccinations and inoculations completely changes how things work. That people are suddenly healthier, that they're giving all of these gifts freely to the people of Thuringia and then farther and farther out.
I mean, just knowing
one of the things that's really interesting is that one of the things that so many alternate histories do is they often have to come up with these sort of plot contortions to get a significant number of modern weapons back. This is a 6-mile sphere. It's around West Virginia. Almost everybody hunts to put food on the table. Also, they're kind of nutty about guns. This is the sort of, it's a conversation piece to take out your dozen weapons and argue which one is better. And they actually did. Eric asked somebody to do, and they took they got some sort of census or something like this. They got some. They made an estimate of how many weapons of roughly what kind were in that town. Far more convincing than all the an armory came back in time, or a big police station. No, this was West Virginia, and hillbillies with guns that don't just like guns, they feed themselves with the use of those guns. So that was,
I would say,
yeah.
If the armory, say a National Guard armory was in the town, went back, I know what military grade looks like. I would still hazard a bet that the mountain folks' weapons were better quality.
Yeah, and better maintained, et cetera.
Better maintained, yeah.
They all would have names too.
Yeah. So
I'm going to go get old Bessie, and we're going to take that squirrel out.
And of course, to defend themselves, they had to basically politically influence everything around them and then build their allies up to the point where they were able to protect them, which meant that we also had the beginning of an arms industry of converting. You go to flintlocks, you go to breech loaders, and you try and maintain an edge. And of course, people are sneaking in and copying books on guns in their high school library, so they're building them in Turkey, and they're starting a Russian and a Polish.
First, Richelieu and his gang.
Absolutely, and then think about it. I'm Charles II. I'm a little insecure already, and then I read about the English Civil War.
Just a little insecure.
Just a little insecure.
How badly it ended for him.
Well, so it reads what happens and who does it.
Charles the First.
Charles the First, right? Charles III is the one who came back. Yeah.
So with the town going over, obviously, like plumbing and stuff is being practical. Did it just take surface level, or did it do almost spherical? Because with basements,
spherical. Yeah,
spherical effect.
That was one of the things that the only thing they added to the actual historic town or village there where Eric lived was a power plant. The actual town of Magdeburg.
Magdeburg's the city.
The city of Thuringia. I can't recall. Mannington. Thank you.
Mannington, West Virginia.
Yeah, Mannington. The only thing they added to that was the power plant, because that was one of the things, the MacGuffin, the sole MacGuffin he felt he needed for.
You can't have the electricity shut off when you move.
Right. But everything else is actually extant in the town, and like I said, a projection of their census materials was used to make the grid. And then depending on
the industry in the town would depend on the age range of people there, because some of the West Virginia towns would be. My sister lives in West Virginia, so I've been through some of those areas. But in the 2000s, I think, or early 2000, I imagine more of them were still thriving than 20 years later,
or at least younger. Yeah,
or at least younger. Yeah,
and that is again. There's so many levels that where he was lucky, but also really threw himself some great lifelines that he didn't close it off.
And I know a lot of authors, you create what you need as you need it, because it's just, you just want to write. The idea that he thought to make the whole dang genealogy and make the whole town by personage, like that seems like a lot of
didn't initially think that out. But when he opened up the universe, he's like, I got to pump the brakes on some folks to make sure that this is still believable and that it still makes sense to me, Eric. That we will have only this population, and also that makes them a finite resource, and it really adds to the realism. And one of the coolest things, there's so many damn cool things about the series, but some of the characters are your high school teacher is like the biggest hero for an entire generation of Grantville people, because she's the one who taught them the little history they knew about this era in the first place. And then when it comes to
Melissa Maley, she's one of my favorite characters.
Yeah, and she's a razor wit, and she doesn't take any guff off of anybody.
And I'm just picturing the West Virginia women that are my sister's neighbors and how they might react to the cultural mores of like 1600s Europe. That would be some interesting conversation.
And so there you have. Also, you have again, you have all the Protestant stuff and the Protestantism versus the Lutherans versus the Baptists. So you have a ton of stuff going on there. And we had Eric worked with experts on some of these religions, experts on some of these regions where people were going. And we had a lot of people who knew their engineering quite well. We had guys making some of these muzzle loading guns and shooting them at the range at LibertyCon. I mean, it was an industry of really fun, pro history, pro people. We can do better.
Hey everyone, I just realized I got so into this conversation with all these awesome authors that I forgot to do a commercial. So hopefully this isn't too intrusive inserting it in the way we did. And I am going to pause for a moment while we shamelessly shill for the man.
20 years have passed since the Ixa almost wiped humanity from the face of the galaxy. Now they have returned with a prophecy of doom. And the prophecy is already coming true. Start the series readers are calling an action-packed military thrill ride. Download Super Carrier today. Book 1 in the Ixan Prophecies trilogy. Available from Amazon and Audible.
All right, thank you for sticking with us through that commercial interlude. And now we'll get back to talking about the 1632 universe with some of the coolest cats we know. And with that, I'll hit the end. And there's a new form of history now that's taking academics aren't quite thrilled with, but the idea of actually living the way they would have, trying the more practical hands-on effects. Because you saw that in the Sharps rifles where they did the butt loading and oh, you can't do that. And then reenactors with safety precautions taken were showing that, yes, you could. Is it ideal? No. Would it wear the rifle out quicker? Yes. But does it work? Also, yes. And so I think you're going to benefit going forward. Like as a reader, if you're looking for this, you can find videos somewhere of people performing with these old weapons. And so you can kind of envision it in ways that weren't around even 10 years ago.
There's a woman called Ruth Goodman who writes books like How to Be a Tutor and How to Behave Badly in Elizabethan England and so on. And she lives as a tutor or an Elizabethan or whatever period she's studying. And she does the things that they do and can speak absolutely as to how historically these things worked. So there are people who are recreating how people lived 300, 400 years ago.
She's the one that wore the linens, right? She wears the linens instead of bathing.
And explaining why people people didn't stink in the 1600s because they had other ways of keeping clean. That we always think, oh no, they were scenting themselves with perfumes
Perfume.
or anything. No, they had means. They had
So,
means.
given that Shakespeare died in 1616 and they're going roughly 15 years after that, does he answer definitively? Did Shakespeare really write, or was it multiple people? Because there are rumors and theories. And
Okay, Eric thought firmly that Shakespeare did not write the plays. I disagree firmly with him, and I did.
agree, and I agree with Jodi.
Yeah.
okay.
And her book that she wrote.
Yeah, in my book, people saw Shakespeare's plays. Like the next door neighbor to my main character was a court lady, and of course she 15 years back had gone to the Globe and saw plays performed and written by William Shakespeare.
Nice. So that just a random thing that struck me is like, oh, we might get in the series the answer, right?
And that's one of the coolest things about, if you look at this, the things that were going on in the world. My entree into writing a novel was at the Chicago Worldcon. There was Eric ran his
Snarking the plots,
where he would say, this is what we have planned. And then he would take like questions or people that wanted to, do something. And I was a huge player of Total War Empire at the time. So I was like, I was like, because you can't play as the Mughals in that, but you can play as the successor state to them, and the British and everything else. And I'm like, so what's going on in India? And Eric's, because at the time, 1632 is when the Taj Mahal was begun, because that's when she passes. Taj Mahal passes. So you have one of the great monuments of the world, of world history, a World Heritage Site, being constructed by one of the great love stories of history in an exotic locale, that was richer than everybody else. Indeed, why we say somebody's a music mogul now is because they're of the Mughals. So there's all these layers, and I was like, hey, what's going on in India? I don't know, write it. You challenge me, I'll go ahead and do it. So 18 months later, after basically self-educating on that whole shelf there in the middle with the books on their side, most of that is Indian history of the 17th century.
Everything I know about Indian history, I learned in Sharp's Rifles.
There you go. Not a bad place.
Not at all.
Got that right. Don't reduce Civil War stuff, but Cornwall's Sharps are right on for the history. I'm a Napoleonic nut, and he got it right pretty much.
So I'm just thinking about
the
the Great Vowel Shift was roughly 1400 to 1700 range. So catching right at the end, it gives you that kind of otherworldly with the language without it being unintelligible. So do you guys factor the language in the text, or is it just, okay, we know they're speaking funny and then we write it normal? Like, are the
that's absolutely picked up. As a matter of fact, what is mostly spoken in the region around Grantville is now called Amerideutsch, American German, and it is actually a kind of hybrid language. It's unclear. One of the things I think and maybe Jodi's novel touches on this. I've read as much as time is permitted, but I haven't seen this yet, which is that anything said in England, any books that are sort of pirated out or copied, and there's no restriction on it, is going to introduce them to not just modern English. If any, you go from Shakespeare, and you consider, well, that's pretty difficult. Then you see Chaucer, it's like, oh, that's a lot more. Yeah, that's more like almost German than English. But then you get only about 80 years later, and you're dealing with Swift, and Swift is very close to modern English. By the time you're to 1850s, yeah, Dickens sounds a little funny, but that's about as much as you can say. And they're looking at that whole spectrum. And I've got to think that at least amongst the reading classes, there's going to be a huge amount of influence, because one of the things is that we haven't spoken about, it is the height of fashion to have anything uptime. And if you have an original, oh my goodness, you can probably dine on those tales for the better part of a season, so there is all sorts of foment that is generated by the presence of modern English and in conjunction with the library, which has become terribly fashionable. And I think that creeps into a lot of narratives, but I don't think anybody has either wanted to or has found a way to make that a compelling dramatic arc on its own. But it certainly supports many of the others.
Early in the process,
I think it's a minor. It's not enough to make a plot out of, but it's a minor change, an alteration, and it could be referred to almost as an affectation for people to start speaking modern English. But
modern to circa 2000, obviously.
Right.
Well,
If you follow the literature, because you're talking about Swift, but also Defoe.
Yep.
Because he's a lot closer to the 1632 period than even Swift.
Mm-hmm.
And still understandable, still comprehensible to modern people. But there's going to be a linguistic shift. So, but it's not out of range.
Yeah.
Almost always, except where mistranslation or something is a plot element. When you're writing for the public, you avoid confusing them by throwing languages at them.
Right.
Because all in all, let's not lose sight of this was an entertainment book. And Eric and Jim and all of us made the decision to not worry about their speaking German 3 months after they land.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, enough to run for office.
Yeah.
And all of this, because if we do put all those complications in, we're going to slow everything down to no benefit.
I speak 3 languages, and I'll tell you, if you want to have sex with somebody, you want to get employed, and you just need to speak it to live your life, 3 months is no time. It's not a problem.
Immersion works. That they've proven that.
Immersion works. If you want to survive, if you're in a hostile environment or anything like that, you can definitely do it. So it is not, I don't think it's at all like a hand wavium thing, but it certainly serves the story. But one of the most fun you can have with that language stuff is like in India, they called Europeans Ferengi. And this is peak DS9 fans. So the nerds they're like, so you call us Ferengi because you actually think we're like Ferengi? Because they didn't know that these uptimer kids.
They've stolen from the past, and it's come back to haunt them in the past.
It's a lot of fun, to kind of play around with some of those things, the linguistic aspects of it. That language nerds and etymology nerds will just go nuts for.
Well, they've done some studies, and various Christian missionaries from various denominations have gotten people fluent in all kinds of languages in 3 to 6 months. I don't find that hard to believe at all. At least fluent enough to be functional. Like they're not maybe reading high treaties on whatever, but so because I was graduating class, I kind of have an idea of the kind of books that would have been in a school at the era. And I know we had books that happen to have schematics of like the ironclads and Wright's biplane and such. So I have to imagine this West Virginia town would have it too, because they were kind of ubiquitous, right? Young boys love that stuff. So do they bring in air power and modern ships into the mix?
Yes. And for all the other things, yes.
Yeah. I mean, in as much as
there are more things in a library in the 2000s. Going back to my high school library was 3 floors in building, and it was full of books, some really esoteric things like learning days of the week in 26 languages and so on, but how to build things, historical overviews. What high school libraries have become since then is really sad. They've taken out so much of it in order to make them media centers. But back in 2000, it would not have been like that. It would have been much like my high school.
Particularly in West Virginia.
My high school.
Where also there's going to be a lot of how-to manuals in probably at least a third of the houses.
In a working class town, yeah.
And then you got Encyclopedia Britannica, because we still had those when I was in high school, the A to Z for those. So I hadn't even considered that. And you're right, in modern libraries, so much of it would be digital and it'd be internet
That's the
based.
reason why I hope that if the TV show goes forward, that they don't set it in the original town in 2025. It's because
So Griffin mentioned gaming, and I have to imagine that anybody who's like a dice rolling nerd would love this setting. So is there anything being done with this in the gaming space? You've talked about TV, and we've obviously got the books. Any game content?
Yeah, so Steve Jackson Games contracted with Eric to provide a 1632 source book and setting book for GURPS. And Chuck and I worked on that, and several other folks as well from the universe all contributed to it, and hoping it's going to come out in the next year or so. But Steve Jackson's running up against all the pain that everybody else is and uncertainty right now. So
Steve Jackson's products are printed in China.
Yeah, I know. I've talked to some. I know Troll Lord Games literally just bought land because they're going to build their own printing plant so they can get away with those concerns. So I definitely understand why that would be an issue. Now, the other thing to think about is some of the people don't think about, like the war trophies that might be at a VFW. So like the one in my sister's small town in West Virginia, they actually have a Sherman tank that has been demilled, but it could be brought back to life if you know what you're doing relatively easily.
they don't have anything like that. But what they
I was wondering.
what they do have is a couple crazy Vietnam veterans who may or may not have had some things stored that the ATF did not know about in 2000 or the 90s.
It's amazing what service people that I know have brought home from war
Oh, yeah.
zones. Like one friend brought home an entire blacksmithing operation, piece by piece.
They got wise when I was in the Army. They were scanning our packages home. They caught somebody who was trying to send an M16 home a piece at a time, and the bolt is what gave them away. They got caught. So
Yeah, in Korea, they were sending Jeeps home by pieces, literally.
so the other thing is in a small town that's going to have some of the older weapons, they'd be a lot easier to maintain because there's less small pieces too, which is perfect. And you could
One of the important things more than that is they have a lot of people with the skills at making things, making dies, that can be used to make a weapon of X type or X type or X type and introducing that. And by introducing that technology to their allies and having it stolen by their enemies, you have, say, take your aircraft, you have basically aeronautical with both dirigibles and airplanes, technical war going on constantly.
300 years in advance.
Yep.
As people, they can do that. Steal me those plans, and we'll start making them in France or Turkey. Turkey did dirigibles. France stole airplanes.
The other thing to think about, since you mentioned the milling stuff, is the ability to understand the purities of metal. I would imagine the West Virginia miners, if they have any level of skill at a forge, are going to know how to make it better quality metal with less impurities too.
Yeah, but one of the things also, and this is one of the places where the really detailed experts and the people who are just willing to do deep dives into fairly recondite materials will point out that at this point in time, the amount of iron that's converted into steel every year is remarkably low. The real issue with creating high grade steel is that it's not just that you have coke as well. You'll need chromium and a number of other components, and those are not even being mined at this point. So I forget exactly whose stories there are, but there are these expeditions going to places on the map, on a map where supposedly there is a deposit of this located. So they are they're making big changes, but they are limited by not so much even material science as material availability, because people aren't even aware. We're 250 years before the periodic table of elements, right? I mean,
Bessemer steel, I think, is 1850, something like that.
Right. And of course that's also, now you're not even talking, you're talking about electricity, as your controls of temperature are so much more precise. They got a lot of catching up to do, but they are also leapfrogging centuries in the process.
Because you can do it, and how.
Yeah.
Well, also,
Chuck, don't you do something about oil, which would, you're talking about finding a tank, but once the gasoline runs out in the service stations.
Well, and that actually kicks off most of the stuff in the New World, because being Americans, they know a lot about, and there's just a lot of stuff in the libraries about where the big oil strikes are, and they actually, it's also a counterintelligence ploy. As you probably are aware, obviously when Germany in World War II is having to gasify coal, obviously there aren't a lot of ready liquid petroleum supplies around. Right. And a lot of people were going for Texas and things like that, but they actually do that as a kind of draw play, counterintelligence, because the real, if you can get to it, is if you can make friends with I forget what the Native Americans are in that part of Louisiana, but the Jennings field in Louisiana is a much better field, and that's most of the action in the two Caribbean novels ultimately is set into motion by that. The things that happen otherwise are dealing with, obstacles like the entirety of the Spanish Empire, minor things like that. So,
and then of course the colonization of America is relatively young,
and it can be the slave trade can be put a stop to. We can do better. That was one of the things about Eric's work, was we can do better with this new history. So we can stop the wholesale destruction of Native American populations in places. We can. We can arm them to resist the Spanish, the Dutch, the English, ourselves, all these things.
Inoculate them.
Yeah, and inoculate them too. So there's all sorts of really cool stuff there. One really cool note for me that was just mind-boggling was, in the early days in kerosene days, we would make a pump and we would pump out the crude oil and throw it in the river in order to get to the kerosene. So how much of this production did we lose out of all these wellheads, especially the eastern United States wellheads that, were easily accessible? Did we lose because we were just pitching it out because it wasn't the exact product we wanted?
Kind of like later how we burned off all the natural gas.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, exactly.
So you could save the whale population because you don't necessarily need them, the blubber either.
Need them for the oil, right?
Interesting. So you've mentioned, obviously there's the gaming manual that will come out at some point, printing dependent. Are there any plans for like graphic novels or comics in this universe?
I'm sure we'd be happy to try and work with somebody if they wanted to do it. That'd be really interesting to see, because the blend of, as you can see from the covers, the blend of like a 2000 era dressed hillbilly and a guy in a ruffled lace, like the English were still wearing, collar is quite a juxtaposition, right? Trucker hats and lace collars. I think that'd be fun.
There is a magazine.
Okay. What is the magazine? I hadn't found that when I was doing my Googling.
1632 and beyond.
Okay.
It's a little digest size magazine.
Yeah,
or online.
It's fiction only at this point. It's not an illustrated magazine or something like that.
And it basically is open for submissions, and people get it. And it expands the 1632 universe. There's always a number of stories, and sometimes novels presented over several issues.
Yeah, serialized novels, and then there's also nonfiction articles as well, just talking about the history and or the technology of what might be possible given the materials and accessibility of those materials and knowledge.
So is the magazine a print or is it a digital run?
I believe at this time it's print on demand. And it is also very, very much readily available digitally.
And the last 100 issues are available digitally as well.
Yep.
So there's about another 1 million words there.
If not more, yeah.
Jodi's book does a thing where because he's paranoid about the English Civil War, he puts a adamant prime minister in and throws out the competent guy because he led the Civil War against him, and it sort of cycles around to basically restarting the Civil War. Could you explain how that worked? How sending the mercenaries?
It's the law of unintended consequences. He's afraid of what the history books say is going to happen to him, so he tries to suppress any kind of dissent, and he's going against people who put him out. Put him in prison and beheaded him in the past, in the future past, in the alternate now an alternate history. So he's suppressing people who might otherwise have just sat the whole thing out, and making things worse for himself by harassing and disenfranchising people that would otherwise ignore his antics, who did not act against him in the future past. So
you're running into the idea that even if you change the facts, you don't change the man, and so his behavior still causes him problems. Essentially,
he is a problem. He spoiled, paranoid,
and the people who work for him are a problem.
He has people who are competent, and he did not pay attention to them. He's working with somebody who is very greedy and very ambitious, and it's not going to go well for him, but probably not in the same way that the future past has, but it almost certainly will start the Civil War earlier because he's hyper anticipating. So if I am able to continue the story, this is going to happen.
So was the porting over of people from the future into the past a one-time thing, or do people still trickle in periodically? Is
one time we only had the numbers that were on the JEDCOM that Virginia put together.
That's it. So how big is the town? About 2,500?
It was originally, and now it's down to 1,900, I think.
I thought it was 35, and it had dropped to like 20.
Well, a lot moved out, but I'm saying how many actually came over in the ring?
I think like 3,500, 3,700.
35, 39, something like that.
Yeah.
And there was a pretty good die-off initially, and then we've whittled away a few of them since then as well in the years since, because it is
busy running the rest of Europe, or getting highly paid to run radios.
So was the die-off from disease or initial conflict with the locals?
Mostly from diseases that they wouldn't, they already had, or pre-existing conditions that they already had and wouldn't be able to treat.
No more new drugs.
Yep.
No more insulin.
Oh, yeah. And then anybody with like electronics in their bodies, pacemakers and whatnot, might have trouble getting those maintained.
Yep.
No more antibiotics.
Yeah.
No more nitroglycerin. I mean, the medicines alone, which they are very, very slowly rebuilding, and some things that they have no means of making again. And it's heartbreaking, but if the power went off in a hospital, you would lose people right away.
Yeah.
Their hospital is small and only has a few doctors in a town that size.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't even have a hospital. It's just a
clinic.
A couple of doctors' offices. Yeah, clinic. Yeah. So that's again the level of realism is quite impressive, and they're being exposed to all these pathogens and people who don't take the same self-care measures that we would take now, and their diet sucks, so the diseases are running rampant. Plus, there's the 30 years war going on, so there's people raping and pillaging across the the hillside and carrying their diseases wherever they're going, causing famines, all that kind of things. And again, the magic of it is we can do better.
And one of the things that I think really attracted me to working in this is because what I'm probably known best for, and what I probably gravitate towards most readily, is hard science fiction. Now, the thing about this is there is